Chapter 1171 feels as though it's been forever since the last chapter came out, since it was released early, or at least the scans did, so it meant a longer break than usual, and there were no new anime episodes either because of that other break, so there was no One Piece for like 3 weeks, which isn't long in the grand scheme of things, but day to day, like anything else, you can feel it. And finally we're back, although I shouldn't say there was no One Piece content throughout these past 3 weeks, because a new trailer for the second season of the live action was released, and it blew my expectations out of the water. There's another manga break next week, one of the regular ones rather than these magazine breaks we've had to deal with, so maybe I'll make a full video about this trailer next week because there's so much in it, and they've committed so much more than I expected them to, which is amazing. We can forget about the wackiness being diluted to better fit the live action medium, because from the looks of it they went balls to the walls insane for this season, and there's only 2 months to go before it's out. But apart from that trailer, there's been no other new One Piece content until this chapter 1171, where this flashback, the longest in the story, finally ends and we return to the present, but still 14 years ago to begin with. Gabon speaks about what would have happened if Harald was able to leave, and really thinking about it, this is a horror movie premise. Like, it sounds terrifying. What do you do when a giant just turns up to your town, and no matter what you do, you can't stop it? You drop a nuke on his head and he just reforms himself like a one-man rumbling, with he and Yarul both gobsmacked by the power of the fruit, elbaf's treasure. We know previous kings tried to eat the fruit themselves, although they failed, and we know Yarul, who's incredibly old, would have seen or known about all of these other monarchs trying and failing. So him finally being able to see what this devil fruit is capable of is probably really satisfying for him. His curiosity has been satiated in a sense. I'm saying in a sense since he does mention how he hadn't heard anything about the actual power of the fruit. Well, there's two ways I'm seeing what Yarul says here. The first is that he had no idea about how strong the fruit was, and to be fair, how could he, or anyone else for that matter, since the fruit is like double Yarul's age at least. They know it's legendary, but legendary doesn't equal power. Buggy's gonna go down as a legend, but he's gonna remain as Buggy, so not very strong. So they never actually had any way of knowing whether or not it was powerful enough to get the job done here, but now they do, and they can't believe what they just saw. And the other way I'm interpreting Yarul's words is that he never knew about the fruit at all, which is kind of confusing at first, since we know that the giants on the ship when we were first arriving to the country knew about the legendary fruit, since they were telling us the story of Loki. But it could be a situation where the fruit was only originally known to the royal family, but after this incident everybody eventually found out about it sometime between here and the present. Meanwhile, Shanks is looking back on some of the conversations he had back in Marijwa, first with Harald, who was only ever thinking about the growth and stability of his nation, while on the other hand is a conversation he had with his father, Garling, and it just about encapsulates everything you would expect from a celestial dragon, even one with an above average IQ, and by that I mean above average for a celestial dragon. He starts by saying whatever Shanks wants, it's his. You could say that's just a father wanting to spoil his child, but really we know it's just coming down to the greed of these scumbags. He says Shanks must have lived a chained, restricted life up until now, even though as a pirate he lived as freely as he possibly could. And in this situation where he's now back home, and from their perspective he's working to become a holy knight, arguably the knights are some of the least free of all celestial dragons, since they have actual duties to carry out while everyone else can lounge, dine and slog around. So it sounds as though Garling's idea of being free is directly linked to lineage. Celestial dragons on top, everybody else below. Shocking. Those who live below aren't human, he says, and he's half right. In this case we have fishmen, minks, giants, we had buccaneers, and there are many more, but also this is just another classic line from a celestial dragon, as if every insult they throw out isn't a direct reflection of who they are themselves. And what's worse or better from a storytelling point of view is that even though you're reading this, you can hear clear as day Garling speaking here with an incredibly condescending tone. He fully believes what he's saying is right. So back to now, because after remembering Harald's earnesty and his father's self-righteousness, he grabs the shallow covenant on his arm, because it's as though Shanks hates himself purely for being associated with them, for sharing the same blood with someone like that, and he is blaming himself. It's weird but fascinating to see Shanks kind of break down, because in the present he's the level-headed one who shows up to calm the situation. That's how we've known him, but here I guess he's still having to come to terms with the state that this world is in. And seeing Gabon trying to calm him down like the father figure he has been since the days of the Roger Pirates, This is a really good scene, and we see Loki beside his father's body, placing his cloak over him because what's underneath is not appropriate for a shonen manga, but also that's his father. And the same as Shanks, he doesn't understand why someone like Harald, who had no enemies, had no ulterior motives, who only cared for the betterment of his nation and his people, would deserve such a fate. It's like, now that it's over, everyone's just left with their own thoughts. And now to Marijua Pangaea Castle, we see Emu huffing and puffing like they were following Joyboy's Haki Blast. Well, it's not that extreme, they're not hunched over, they're sitting on the empty throne, but still them breathing this heavily is a big deal, with the big possible difference here being that this reaction could be tied to Harald's defeat directly. But first, they said how they thought no one could ever defeat him, and you can't really blame them. I've said it before that Harald was already possibly the strongest outside of Emu, Joyboy and Davy Jones, and honestly, the more I say it, the more I convince myself that he was the absolute strongest, above Roger, Zebek and whoever else. Then add Emu's power on top, and that should have surely meant he was an unstoppable machine, and yet he was stopped anyway. So the elders advised sending another knight to Elbaf to carry out the rest of the mission completed, but Emu is, I'm gonna say, scared here. They have been shaken up, and for more than one reason. Firstly, because there's someone who can oppose their power, which was unthinkable before this, and second, because of what they say next. They say sending other knights would mean more casualties, which paints Harald to have been Emu's kind of masterpiece or magnum opus, their greatest asset. So if there's something on Elbaf who can take him down, sending other knights would be like sending lambs to the slaughter. And also, these covenants come at a cost. There's a price to pay for them. So back to Harald's defeat directly affecting Emu. They mention how they thought no one could defeat him, and it's been a long-standing theory which has gotten very close to being confirmed, especially with the revelation of the contracts that tether people to Emu. But the idea is that rather than simply granting these people power to use, Emu specifically gives them a piece of their own power. Saturn's death is another thing that points to this being the case, since we see him having his powers drained from him by Emu, as if Emu's powers were the only reason he was still alive. So take those abilities away and he shrivels up into a skeleton, as he should be after being alive for near a millennium. Emu's power is what sustained him and assumedly the rest of the elders. So on a side note, if Garling were to have his powers drained, would he die or would he just go back to normal the way he was before? Because he was just granted these powers, so he hasn't lived an unnaturally long life yet. So how does having the powers taken away affect him? Anyway, back to Harald here. The difference between Saturn and him is that Emu actively chose to take their power back from Saturn, while with Harald here that connection is forcibly severed, meaning Emu didn't take it back, which could mean this is a portion of Emu's strength that they now have lost completely, since Harald's death meant they couldn't retrieve it, which is why they are now huffing and puffing, because they've lost a part of themselves. They have indirectly taken damage. Who knows how long it's been since they felt this kind of pain, or felt any real pain for that matter, because this has taken a toll on them. I mean, you could say that they were hurt in God Valley with that combo attack, since we know that even with regenerative abilities they still feel pain. We know that thanks to Sommers in the present after Gabon attacked him, but how different is that pain when a piece of them is completely removed, cut off, that cannot be regenerated? Similar to the concepts of Horcruxes in Harry Potter, where Voldemort splits up his soul, which ends up weakening him, although in this case with Emu it's clear that they are still ridiculously powerful, still the most powerful in fact. One thing is that with the Holy Knights is that we see they do age, they can regenerate, but their aging isn't stopped like it seems to be with the elders. So that kind of difference, whether it comes from what tier of contract you have, does killing an elder have an even greater effect on Emu than killing a knight? Key distinction: you kill them. Emu doesn't take the powers back to kill them, you kill them, you know, something out of Emu's control. And they do say one more thing, which seems to be their reasoning as to why they hadn't tried to take Elbaf during the 14 years between then and their current attempt in the present. It seems that Emu only saw this idea of controlling Elbaf as a possibility because of who they thought Harald was, specifically who they thought he was, and not who he actually was, because this next bit from Emu is really interesting. They say the giants are warmongers, warriors at heart, and mindlessly allowing them into the fold would only destroy them from the inside. So what I'm gathering is that Emu's plan here wasn't only to use Harald's peaceful ways to get a hold of the giant's might, but Harald's mindset was necessary as a way to pacify the whole nation and make them easier to control. Harald pacifying the giants was Emu's path to controlling them. But then they say he was too good to be true. He was convenient. He was better off not being born. born, or a king not meant to exist, translation differences, which I think they mean that his ideals were too idealistic for this world. The world is too cruel for someone so naive. And back to what I said about who Emu thought Harald was not actually being who he was, Emu's first line about the giants being warmongers at heart also tells me that despite Harald wanting peace, they assumed that warrior side of him would still be there, the giants' thirst for war would never leave him. But that was far too naive on Emu's part, because even they couldn't have known how truly idealistic and devoted Harald was in his pursuit of peace, where he would fully forsake his and his nation's warrior past, which is why they said he was too good to be true, because he doesn't fit into this kind of world. But Emu isn't done there, because they say history never lies and they were never meant to work with the giants, so that's kind of confirmation, even though we never needed it, over whose side the giants were on historically, so maybe it's just not meant to be. Although I'm sure this is kind of an ego thing as well, where this was a failure and they couldn't shift the blame in this situation. It wasn't a Saturn egghead deal, this was all Emu, and yet they still failed with Harald. They are now acting as if they never needed the giants anyway, which was true from their perspective, because in this moment they have total control of the world, and the only thing that's forced these guys into action in the present, with elbaph, with egghead and whatever else, trying to take control of elbaph and the giants again, is because of the return of Joyboy, which I'm pretty confident in saying wasn't part of Emu's grand plans. So now they need that strength. And finally they say, never forget, elbaph is D. So elbaph having a connection to the will of D sounds like a pretty obvious statement to make, which it is. Like, of course the giants would be connected to the D. They're connected to Nika massively, but that's just it. Elbaph's connection to the distant past that we know of comes from Nika, not Joyboy or the will of D or the Void Sentry. Yes, we assume and it's almost guaranteed they are connected to Joyboy and had a role to play in the ancient war, but I don't think anything yet has been explicitly stated. Luffy even mentioned the name Joyboy to Dory and Broggy during Egghead, but they had no visible reaction to that information. There is one giant with the will of D, but that's Saul, and he's not even from Elbaph. Like, Fishman Island is connected through the Mermaid Princess and the power of Poseidon. Wano is connected through the Poneglyphs and Pluton. Water 7 is connected through Pluton, so what connects the giants directly to Joyboy and the Void Sentry? It may be Ragnar, who I've theorized is a former member of Joyboy's crew, one of his companions. But I think the bigger connection, the better option, is the existence of the ancient giant shipwrights who are connected to Water 7 as well, but those guys are Elbaph's greatest link to the Void Sentry. But another thing here is the phrasing. To say Elbaph is D, what does that mean? Does the will of D originate in Elbaph? Does this confirm Joyboy was from Elbaph, that he was a giant or a buccaneer who were descended from giants? Saying Elbaph is D sounds like Elbaph is somebody's name, and if you think about it like that, then let's go back to Little Garden, where I think it was Dory who mentioned Elbaph as the name of a deity, the god of war. So then linking that to the mural where one of the lines can only be interpreted as meaning Joyboy fanned the flames of war, he started the ancient war. Could Elbaph be the actual or another name of Joyboy, who was called the god of war because of what he did during the Void Century? And the reason Dory and Broggy had no reaction to hearing his name in Elbaph is because they don't know him as Joyboy, they know him as Elbaph. We haven't heard anything about this Elbaph god of war character since Dory mentioned it in that arc all the way how many years ago, so maybe it was one of those things that was just kind of adapted into the sun god story we have now. Maybe it's something else. Am I in too deep? 100%. Do I care? Absolutely not. By the way, there's no way this arc ends this year. I know the Jump Festa message said it would, but there's just too much to get through. Unless this fight technically ends the arc and we learn about all of this information regarding Elbaph elsewhere, like maybe the giants are that important that all of this is only revealed on Laugh Tale itself, but I want to learn about it now. Loki, understandably so, is completely pissed, and it turns out there were a few survivors in the massacre in the castle. Some of the guards did survive, and his intention was to recruit those guys to go and attack the government, which obviously is a stupid idea, but again, understandable. I theorized about something similar to this, where the truth wasn't told to the other giants, the citizens of Elbaph, because had they learned the truth of the government and Emu manipulating their king, their beloved king, they also would have wanted to go and attack the government, attack Emu, attack whoever did this, whoever's responsible, and abandon Harald's peaceful ways in the name of avenging him, which would be a bad idea because although they are strong on their own, the giants aren't strong enough, which would mean they all die, leaving us, our side, without a very very vital piece in the final war, so we really can't have that happening. And we see it was in fact Loki's wishes that the truth about this day not be revealed to anybody outside of the castle, fully aware the blame would fall onto him, so that confirms Jarl and Gabon had been playing dumb this whole time. But it's also cool how they decided to go along with that specific decision from Loki. And again, Shanks kind of takes a back seat here, which is really interesting because with him being the guy in the present, it shows he's not there yet in this moment. But Loki is actively shouldering the blame, but also shouldering the weight of avenging the fallen gods and obviously his father. But one other thing is that I like how Jarl is the one who warned him about going against the government, because he was one of the co-captains of the giant pirates at the peak of their powers long before Harald and this flashback began 109 years ago. So he, as one of the co-captains when the giants ruled the new world, would surely have had some run-ins with the government himself, so he would be well aware of how powerful an organization it is. And despite Jarl trying to stop Loki here, he still sails away with this new makeshift crew. So this does explain why eventually Shanks stepped in personally, because this was a suicide mission and Loki was needed for the future. Although that was 6 years ago and this event was 14 years ago, meaning there's 8 years between him leaving Elbaf and Shanks returning him to Elbaf. So you wonder, what did he do during those 8 years? He was given a special 2.6 billion berry bounty. So what happened? One thing we can say is that during these 8 years was when he met Lola and all of that happened. He was rejected, which would make sense why that situation hasn't been mentioned in the present, because Loki did that independently. The actual nation of Elbaf and any of the giants on the island weren't involved in this. It was just him and maybe his crew. And so this marks the end of this backstory, the second half of chapter 1152 up to the first half of chapter 1171. So around 19 chapters in length, taking place across 20 chapters. And even more than that, 1152 was released on the 23rd of June last year, so it's been nearly 7 months, way over half a year since we last saw Luffy or any of the other members of the crew. Like, what other series could do something like this without losing steam and then return to the main cast without losing steam? Either a crazy flashback or a crazy present. It's a win-win situation. So now, finally back to the present day, where Loki is explaining his position. As bad as he was, taking joy in killing his own father is a step too far, many steps too far, and I like how he obviously didn't agree at all with Harald's beliefs, his mission to change the nation, but he still wants here to uphold his father's legacy. Frieren mentions how Jarl didn't allow Loki's execution and kind of protected him, and we do actually see this play out with chapter 1136, where Jarl tried to humanize Loki in the eyes of the giants while not revealing what actually happened. Gabon also offers to explain what happened with Harald specifically, since he knows the details of the contract from Shanks, which Loki doesn't. Earlier, Gabon did say he didn't have the whole story, though that could be either his way of saying he joined the battle late, so he may have missed a few details, so it's better to hear the story from Loki's perspective, or it's better for Loki to tell the tale simply because he's the accused and he's Frieren's brother. It's best if it came from him directly, although there's other stuff to get to, as Frieren, with the full story from Loki corroborated by Gabon and aided by what he's deciphered from Jarl's actions after the fact, he forgives his brother and frees him in the name of fighting for Elbaf and in the name of fighting for their father. So I repeat, Loki is free, physically freed. There's like 3 stages to Loki being freed. The first time when he swung Ragnir at the tree, the second time now where he's been completely unshackled, and the third time which is going to be when the rest of the country learns the truth, taking the weight of that burden off of his shoulders finally. And then a Droga, one of the MMAs, the manifested nightmare monsters, Killingham's creations, whatever you wanna call them, falls down from the sun world, which could pose a question about the extent of Killingham's abilities. Like, is there a range for how far the monsters can go before they just collapse or disintegrate due to being too far away from him? Or is it that as soon as they're created, after that they can do as they wish until someone defeats them? Because the underworld is a good few thousand meters below the sun world, so the second option seems more likely, I think. Although it's also the kind of thing that won't get answered, because who really cares? Does it matter? Remember, while 7 months have passed in real world time, our world time, only 3 minutes have passed in the story. So Loki tells everyone else to go on ahead of him while he takes care of this monster, his first real piece of action as a free giant. 6 years in the making since Shanks, quote, captured him out at sea. Frieren doesn't forgive Loki for everything else he did, which is is fair, and I like that inclusion because Loki did a lot of bad stuff regardless of his own motive or his own sorrows. He wasn't the best brother, and Gabon, despite being in no real shape for any more action after he was defeated, underhandedly mind you, since Colin was used to threaten him, he still wants to go back up as well for that very same reason, very simple reason that he's worried about his son. So it's Sanji who has to carry him up with the rest of them, along with Chopper, so he can continue to take care of him, and I really like this for him. Chopper doing doctor stuff doesn't always have to be fighting, just seeing him do his actual job is nice. But also it's fitting that it's Sanji because of all the connections they've had so far, both connections in the story and connections the fan base has kind of forced upon the two of them. There is the whole Conquerors debate, which to be fair was a thing in the story when Gabon pointed out Zoro having Conqueror's Haki and Sanji thought he was talking about him. Maybe that does lead to something greater though, because it would be cool if Sanji were to become a conqueror as well, and there is literally no better time for him to get it than right now, although his development, his ability to use it would have to grow really quicker than Zoro in Wano, because the fight calls for those with that ability and it calls for them, as I said, right now. This fight has been ongoing, so Loki, Luffy and Zoro are very valuable, but Sanji getting it too and Gabon maybe coaching him as he fights sounds like a lot of fun. However, not everyone goes up straight away because Luffy decides to stay a while and watch Loki fight. He's been waiting for this moment as well, so he's gonna get his money's worth. He has a front row seat to this spectacle on Loki's shoulder, and Loki finishes off the Draga with an attack called Niflheim and uses the Hammer Ragnia to freeze the monster. So Niflheim, one of the 9 realms of Norse mythology, land of darkness, cold, ice, it's obvious where that inspiration for the attack comes from, but to go a bit deeper, it's also stated in Norse mythology that the giant Ymir, kind of the first being that was born, came from the mixture of the Niflheim ice and the fire of another realm, Muspelheim. So could that connection with the giants have any relevance with the giants in this story? But also Loki has ice powers as well. On top of his giant strength, crazy haki, devil fruit powers, Hammer Ragnia which can use lightning and now apparently ice as well. He doesn't need to use his imagination when he has every kind of power imaginable at his disposal anyway. But I do wonder about which of these abilities come from what. As in the lightning we can say is directly tethered to the devil fruit, it's one of that fruit's abilities, and the ice maybe is one of the hammer's abilities, Ragnia's abilities, or Ragnia's devil fruit's abilities, Ratatoska's abilities. It just keeps going. And Luffy, as expected, is amazed by Loki's power, and you just know this is the beginning of a top tier duo, not only in terms of their combined strength, which is arguably unmatched, but also in terms of their personalities, because Luffy can laugh off almost anything Loki throws at him, and Loki's gonna have someone who speaks to him without fear or without holding back, speaking to him for who he is. So a future scenario with Luffy, Loki and Shirahoshi all together would be amazing. So we are officially back and gone again because there's a break next week, but we are still back and we are preparing for an endgame level fight already. Everybody is going up and there are a lot of matchups to determine. Let's say Luffy and Loki versus Imu, Zoro and Sanji versus Dory and Brogy, and the rest of the Holy Knights I don't know because we are a bit short in terms of Conquerors users. We have Gabon, and even if he did fight, he's not at full strength, and there's only one of him compared to 2 remaining knights and all of the Domireversi giants, so the odds still aren't exactly in our favor. But before Egghead, this story was an underdog story for all of those 1100 chapters, so it's not like this feeling is going to be anything new for us.